On the surface, Hannah Whitmore had the kind of life people envied. A beautiful home, a successful husband, two bright children, and a career that filled magazines with elegant interiors and warm lighting. But sometimes a life can fracture from a single moment, and sometimes a single night can echo for the rest of a lifetime. The Whitmore house sat at the end of a quiet street in Queen Anne, Seattle, framed by tall maples that turned amber every fall. From the outside, it looked like a magazine cover. Inside, Hannah Whitmore stood in the kitchen, staring at her phone. David had texted 20 minutes earlier. "Working late again. Don't wait for dinner." She read the message twice, even though it contained nothing surprising. He worked late almost every night. Hannah set the phone down beside the marble countertop and turned back to the pasta boiling on the stove. The kitchen smelled of garlic and basil, warm and comforting, yet the silence of the house felt heavier than it should. Upstairs, her children, Lily and Owen, were finishing homework. "Mom?" Lily called from the staircase. "Yes? Dad not coming home again?" Hannah forced a small smile. "Later tonight." Lily nodded in the casual way children do when something disappointing has become routine. Hannah watched her daughter disappear upstairs and felt a familiar ache settle quietly in her chest. 2 hours later, the children were asleep. The house was dark, except for the soft glow of Hannah's laptop on the dining table. She was reviewing renderings for a downtown restaurant she was redesigning. Warm wood textures, minimalist lighting, clean lines. She had built a reputation in Seattle for spaces that felt intimate and alive. Ironically, intimacy was the one thing her own home seemed to lack. The front door finally opened around 10:47 p.m. David walked in with the exhausted confidence of someone accustomed to long days and important decisions. His suit jacket hung over one shoulder, tie loosened. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He kissed her forehead absent-mindedly as he passed. "How were the kids?" "Good." He opened the fridge, scanning. "Did you eat?" "Yeah, I left a plate for you." "Thanks." The conversation ended there. It wasn't hostile, just empty. Later that night, Hannah stood at the bathroom mirror brushing her hair. David was already in bed, reading emails on his tablet. "You're going to Chicago next week, right?" he asked without looking up. "Yeah, the design conference. How long?" "3 days." He nodded. "Good networking opportunity." That was how David understood the world. Opportunities, outcomes, efficiency. Hannah climbed into bed beside him. For a moment she studied his face, the same face she had fallen in love with in law school parties and cheap wine bars 12 years earlier. Back then, David had laughed more. Back then, they had talked about everything. Now the silence between them had become something familiar. "David," she said quietly. "Hmm? Do you ever feel like we're just running a household?" He glanced up. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she struggled for words. "Like everything works. Bills, school, schedules, but..." "But what?" Hannah stared at the ceiling. "But we don't talk anymore." David sighed gently, the way people do when they think a problem is unnecessary. "We talk about logistics." He rubbed his forehead. "Hannah, I'm building a firm. This phase won't last forever." "I know. And everything we're doing, it's for this family." She nodded even though he wasn't looking. "I know." After a moment, he leaned over and kissed her. Soft, automatic. Then he rolled over and turned off the light. Hannah stayed awake long after David fell asleep. The rain had started outside, a quiet Seattle drizzle tapping against the windows. She stared into the darkness and wondered something she had never allowed herself to say aloud. When did love start feeling like maintenance? 3 days later, Hannah boarded a flight to Chicago. It was supposed to be a normal business trip. A conference, panels, networking dinners, nothing more. She had no idea that one conversation in a hotel bar would divide her life into 2 versions. Before that night, and everything that came after. Chicago greeted Hannah Whitmore with wind. Cold, sharp, restless wind that beat between the skyscrapers and tugged at the collar of her coat as she stepped out of the taxi in front of the Magnolia Grand Hotel. The city felt louder than Seattle. Faster, less patient. Inside the hotel lobby, everything glowed with polished marble floors and golden lighting. Designers, architects and brand representatives filled the space, badges hanging from their necks as they spoke in animated clusters about projects, materials and trends. Hannah checked in, collected her conference pass, and forced herself into the rhythm of professional enthusiasm. Interior design is storytelling, one keynote speaker said later that afternoon. Hannah sat in the third row, notebook open on her lap, but her mind wandered. She glanced around the auditorium. So many strangers, so many lives intersecting for a few days before drifting apart again. Temporary words, temporary connections. By evening, the conference hosted a networking reception on the hotel's rooftop lounge. The view was breathtaking. Chicago stretched endlessly beyond the glass railings, rivers of headlights, towering buildings, the dark silver shimmer of Lake Michigan in the distance. Music drifted softly through the air. Waiters carried trays of wine and champagne. Hannah stood near the edge of the balcony with a glass of red wine, listening politely as a furniture manufacturer explained sustainable oak supply chains. She nodded, smiled, excused herself after 10 minutes. Sometimes networking felt like acting. She stepped inside the lounge bar to escape the wind. The room was dimmer, quieter, lined with warm wood panels and low amber lights. It was the kind of place Hannah would normally admire professionally, how the lighting softened every edge, how the space felt intimate despite its size. She slid onto a bar stool. "One bourbon," she told the bartender. The bartender raised an eyebrow slightly. "Long day?" "Something like that." He poured the drink. Hannah took a slow sip, feeling the warmth settle through her chest. "You look like someone who designs spaces." The voice came from beside her, deep, relaxed. She turned. The man sitting one seat away looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark hair slightly messy, light stubble, sleeves rolled casually to his elbows. A camera hung loosely around his neck. Hannah smiled politely. "That obvious?" He lifted his glass. "Interior designers stand differently in rooms." "How?" "You notice the corners." Hannah laughed softly. "Guilty." He extended a hand. "Lucas Grant, Hannah Whitmore. Let me guess," he said, leaning back slightly. "You're here for the conference upstairs." "Yes." "And you're already tired of talking about wood finishes." She raised a glass. "You're very observant." "I'm a photographer." He tapped the camera lightly. "Observation is the job." They talked. At first, it was simple conversation. Where they were from, what they did. Lucas traveled constantly for photography assignments, magazines, galleries, documentary projects. "I photograph people mostly," he said. "What kind of people?" "The kind who forget they're being watched." Hannah studied him. "And what does that look like?" Lucas smiled. "Honest." Another drink arrived. Then another. The bar grew quieter as the reception upstairs continued. Outside, the wind pressed rain against the windows. At some point, the conversation shifted. It stopped being polite. Lucas asked questions that people normally avoided. "Are you happy?" he asked suddenly. Hannah blinked. "That's a big question for strangers." Sometimes strangers are easier. She considered deflecting, but the bourbon had softened the careful walls she normally kept intact. "I have a good life," she said slowly. "That's not the same thing." Lucas watched her, not judging, just listening. Hannah exhaled. I used to feel more alive." "What changed?" "Routine? Marriage?" She hesitated. "Maybe." Lucas nodded. "I've seen that before." "In photographs?" "In people." He leaned slightly closer. "You look like someone who spends a lot of time taking care of everyone else." Something about the way he said it made Hannah feel unexpectedly exposed. No one had described her that way before, and yet it felt true. Hours passed without Hannah noticing. They talked about art, travel, childhood memories, the strange loneliness of adulthood. At one point, Lucas showed her photographs on his camera, portraits of strangers in different cities, each face carrying its own quiet story. "You capture something vulnerable," Hannah said. "That's the point." "Do people know you're doing that?" "Sometimes. And if they don't, then it's more honest." Near midnight, the bar began closing. Guests drifted out in small groups. The hotel felt quieter now, almost suspended. Hannah should have gone upstairs, she knew that. Instead, she stood with Lucas near the elevator lobby. Neither of them seemed ready to end the conversation. "You know," Lucas said softly, "you look different now than when I first saw you." "How?" "You're not pretending anymore." Hannah laughed nervously. "That's dangerous." "Why?" "Because tomorrow I go back to my normal life." Lucas studied her carefully. "And tonight?" Hannah didn't answer. The silence between them felt heavy, electric, complicated. The elevator doors opened. Neither of them moved. Then Hannah did something she never imagined she would do. She stepped inside. Lucas followed. No words were necessary. Later, in the quiet darkness of the hotel room, Hannah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Lucas slept beside her, breathing slowly. The city lights flickered faintly through the curtains. For a few moments, she allowed herself to exist in the strange calm of the moment. Then reality returned. David, her children, her life in Seattle. Guilt crashed over her like cold water. What have I done? At dawn, Hannah slipped quietly out of bed. She dressed in silence. Lucas stirred slightly. "You leaving already?" he murmured. "Yes." He sat up slightly, eyes half open. "Will I see you again?" Hannah paused at the door. The answer should have been simple, but she shook her head. No. Lucas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Take care, Hannah." "You too." On the flight back to Seattle, Hannah stared out the window at the endless clouds below. Her phone buzzed with a message from David. "Kids miss you. Safe flight." Her chest tightened. She tied back. "Landing soon. See you tonight." Then she closed her eyes and made a silent promise to herself. What happened in Chicago would never happen again. It would remain a secret. A single night. A mistake. One she would bury so deeply that no one, not even David, would ever know. The first thing Hannah noticed when she returned to Seattle was how ordinary everything looked. The airport crowds moved in familiar rhythms. Taxi drivers called out destinations. Families reunited with quick embraces near baggage claim. Nothing in the world seemed to acknowledge that something inside her had changed, as if Chicago had never happened. David was waiting near the exit doors, with Owen perched on his hip and Lily standing beside him, bouncing slightly with excitement. "Mom!" Lily shouted. Hannah forced a smile and hurried forward, wrapping her arms around her children. Their warmth grounded her instantly, like stepping back into solid reality after drifting too far from shore. "Did you bring souvenirs?" Owen asked. "Of course," Hannah said. David kissed her cheek. "Good conference?" "Yeah," she replied automatically. He picked up her suitcase. "Let's go home." The word home landed differently now. Life resumed its usual rhythm almost immediately. School mornings, packed lunches, client meetings, soccer practices, dinner conversations about homework and weekend plans. On the surface, nothing had changed. But Hannah carried the memory of Chicago like a small stone in her pocket, always there, pressing quietly against her thoughts. At night, when the house was silent, it returned. Lucas's voice, the dim bar lighting, the hotel room, and the choice she had made. Sometimes she wondered why she hadn't simply told David right away. Confession would have been painful but honest. Yet each day that passed made the truth harder to speak, so the silence stayed. Spring turned into summer. The Whitmore backyard filled with the sound of children running through sprinklers and neighbors chatting across fences. David seemed slightly less busy than before. His firm had stabilized after months of relentless expansion. He even started coming home earlier, sometimes before dinner. One evening, Hannah stood at the grill turning vegetables while David sat at the patio table helping Owen with math homework. "Mom," Owen groaned, "Dad says I have to show my work." "That's how math works," Hannah laughed. David looked up and smiled. For a moment the scene felt perfectly normal. Warm sunlight, children laughing, the smell of food. Hannah studied her husband quietly. He looked relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in a long time. And suddenly the guilt hit her again. Sharp, unexpected. "You betrayed this." Months turned into years. Life continued. Hannah's design career grew steadily. She opened a small studio with 2 employees and began landing larger projects: restaurants, boutique hotels, private homes for wealthy tech executives. Her work appeared in regional design magazines. Clients praised her ability to create spaces that felt warm and personal. Ironically, Hannah had become an expert at designing environments that encouraged intimacy and connection. Yet inside her own mind, a quiet distance remained. David changed too. Not dramatically, just subtly. The long work hours eased, but something else replaced them. A thoughtful quietness Hannah couldn't quite interpret. Sometimes she wondered if he sensed something. If guilt had a smell. If secrets left fingerprints in the air. But David never asked questions, and Hannah never offered answers. One rainy autumn evening, nearly 3 years after Chicago, Hannah was organizing old files in her home office. Receipts, project drafts, conference materials. Then she found the envelope, the one from the Chicago Design Conference. Inside were brochures, notes, and a folded name badge. Her stomach tightened instantly. She stared at the badge. Hannah Whitmore, speaker panel. The letters looked harmless, ordinary, but they carried the memory of a different night. She almost threw the entire envelope away. Instead, She placed it carefully back into the drawer, closing it slowly, as if sealing something dangerous inside. Time softened the sharpest edges of guilt, but it never erased them. Some nights, Hannah woke suddenly from dreams she couldn't fully remember. Other nights, she lay beside David in bed, listening to his steady breathing, wondering how fragile trust really was. He trusted her completely. The thought made her chest ache. One night during their 6th wedding anniversary dinner after Chicago, David raised his glass. 12 years, he said. Hannah smiled faintly. 12 years. They clinked glasses. You know, David continued, marriage is strange. How? When we were younger, I thought love was supposed to feel intense all the time. And now? Now I think it's more about choosing each other repeatedly. Hannah studied him carefully. Even when things get boring? Especially then. He took a sip of wine. Consistency matters more than excitement. Hannah nodded slowly, but the words lingered in her mind long after the conversation ended. 7 years passed. 7 quiet years where Chicago became something almost unreal, like a memory from someone else's life. The children grew older. Lily entered high school. Owen discovered a passion for robotics. David's firm expanded again, but he managed his time better now. Family dinners returned, weekend hikes, movie nights. Their life looked stable, healthy, normal. And sometimes Hannah even believed the past had finally disappeared. Until the morning, everything resurfaced. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Hannah was drinking coffee in the kitchen while scrolling through an architecture website of her tablet. A headline caught her attention. Rising photographer Lucas Grant announced his National Gallery exhibition. Her hand froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she opened the article. The page loaded. Then the photograph appeared, and Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. The image showed a woman sitting at a dim bar, laughing softly as she turned towards someone just outside the frame. The lighting was warm, intimate, beautiful. The woman's face was partially shadowed, but Hannah recognized herself instantly. The caption beneath the photo read, Untitled, Chicago, 7 years ago. Lucas had captured that moment, that exact night. And now the photograph was part of a traveling exhibition, one that would soon open in. Hannah's heart began pounding. Seattle. For a long moment, Hannah Whitmore simply stared at the screen. The kitchen around her remained quiet, morning light spilling through the windows, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a garbage truck outside. But the photograph on the tablet had frozen her in place. It was unmistakable. Even though the image was soft and shadowed, even though her face was only partially visible, Hannah recognized the moment instantly. Her hair, slightly loose from the wind, the wine glass in her hand, the half smile she had given Lucas while laughing at something he said. She remembered that exact second. It had been early in the night, before anything happened, before the hotel room, before the mistake that had followed her for 7 years. Her fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled down the article. Photographer Lucas Grant's newest exhibition, Moments Between, has gone viral across social media platforms this week, the article read. The exhibition focused on quiet, intimate moments between strangers in everyday places, bars, subway stations, quiet city corners. But one photograph had captured the most attention, the one titled Untitled, Chicago. Critics described it as a fleeting moment of connection between two strangers, filled with warmth and possibility. Warmth, possibility. Hannah felt something closer to dread. She read the next paragraph slowly. The traveling exhibition will open next month at the Cascade Contemporary Gallery in Seattle, before continuing to New York and Los Angeles. Seattle. The words seemed to echo inside her chest. Lucas was coming here. Hannah? She flinched. David stood in the doorway, tying his tie as he watched her. You okay? Yes, she said too quickly. He walked into the kitchen. What are you reading? Just design news. She locked the tablet screen casually and reached for her coffee. David poured himself a cup. Busy day? Meetings, she replied. He nodded. Same here. For a moment they stood together in comfortable silence. Hannah wondered if her face looked different, if panic showed in her eyes. But David seemed completely unaware. Don't forget Owen's robotics competition tonight, he said. I won't. He kissed her cheek and headed for the door. Love you. Love you too. The words left her mouth automatically. But the moment the door closed behind him, Hannah unlocked the tablet again. The photograph returned, her past staring back at her. The image spread quickly online. Within days it appeared everywhere. Design blogs, photography forums, social media. People praised its authenticity, the softness of the lighting, the expression on the woman's face. She looks like she's falling in love, one commenter wrote. Hannah closed the app immediately. Her heart was racing. No one else recognized the woman in the photo. To the world, it was simply a beautiful anonymous moment. But to Hannah, it was evidence. Proof that the night had existed. 2 weeks later, an email arrived from a colleague. Subject: you should see this exhibit. Hannah opened it cautiously. Hey Hannah, the Cascade Contemporary Gallery is hosting a huge photography exhibition next week. Everyone's talking about it. Thought it might inspire your design work. We should go together, Melissa. Below the message was a promotional poster, and at the center of it, that photograph again. Hannah quickly closed the email. Her pulse was pounding. Lucas hadn't just taken the photo. He had built an exhibition around moments like that. Moments that people believed were spontaneous glimpses into human connection. But Hannah knew something the viewers didn't. The moment in the photo hadn't been innocent. It had been the beginning of something she had spent 7 years trying to forget. That evening, Hannah sat alone in her home office. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of television downstairs where David and the kids were watching a movie. Her laptop screen glowed in the dim room. She had typed Lucas Grant photographer into the search bar. Hundreds of results appeared. Articles, interviews, galleries. She opened one. Lucas looked older now, a little more serious, but unmistakably the same man. In the interview, he spoke about his photography philosophy. The best photographs happen when people forget the world is watching, he said. Hannah's stomach tightened. Had she forgotten the world was watching that night, or had Lucas always been watching? She kept reading. Then another line stopped her. One of my most important photographs was taken in Chicago 7 years ago, Lucas explained. It reminded me that the smallest moments between strangers can hold entire stories. Hannah closed the laptop. Her hands were shaking. Entire stories. He had no idea how true that was. The gallery opening was scheduled for the following Friday. Seattle's art scene buzzed with anticipation. Magazines previewed the exhibition. Local influencers posted invitations online. Everywhere Hannah looked, the image seemed to appear again. The woman at the bar, laughing softly, unaware of the camera, unaware of the future. 3 days before the opening, Hannah received another email. This one from the gallery itself. She opened it reluctantly. Subject: private preview invitation. Dear Hannah Whitmore, as one of Seattle's leading interior designers, we would be honored to invite you to a private preview of Lucas Grant's exhibition before the public opening. Her breath caught. The message continued. Lucas Grant will also be present for a brief talk about his work. He would be there, in the same room, 7 years later. That night, Hannah lay awake beside David. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows. David was already asleep, his breathing deep and steady. Hannah stared into the darkness. Her mind replayed the photograph again and again, the moment Lucas had captured, the moment before everything changed. She wondered if he would recognize her. 7 years had passed. People changed. Maybe he wouldn't remember. Maybe she could simply avoid the exhibition entirely, pretend none of it existed. But something told her it wouldn't be that simple. Secrets rarely stayed buried forever. The next morning, as Hannah put coffee in the kitchen, her phone buzzed with the news notification. She glanced at the screen. Photographer Lucas Grant arrives in Seattle ahead of exhibition opening. A photo accompanied the article. Lucas walking through SeaTac Airport, camera slung over his shoulder, looking exactly like the man she remembered. The panic that Hannah had been holding back for days finally settled deep in her chest. Because now, the past wasn't just a memory anymore. It was here, in the same city, closer than it had been in 7 years. And for the first time since Chicago, Hannah had the terrifying feeling that the secret she had buried so carefully might not stay hidden much longer. The Cascade Contemporary Gallery was already crowded when Hannah arrived. She had almost turned the car around twice on the way there. The invitation had sat unanswered in her inbox for days. Ignoring it would have been the simplest choice. Safe, quiet. But curiosity had slowly grown stronger than fear. Or maybe it wasn't curiosity. Maybe it was the uneasy feeling that avoiding the past didn't erase it. It only postponed the moment when it returned. Now Hannah stood across the street from the gallery, watching people enter through the tall glass doors. The building glowed with warm white light, and the faint murmur of voices spilled onto the sidewalk. She checked her reflection in the car mirror. Simple black dress, hair pulled back loosely. Nothing dramatic. Just another visitor at an art exhibition. Her heart, however, was beating far too fast. "Just look," she whispered to herself, "then leave." Inside, the gallery felt both elegant and intimate. Soft lighting illuminated the photographs displayed along white walls. The air smelled faintly of wine and polished wood. Guests moved slowly from one image to another, speaking in quiet tones about composition, emotion, and storytelling. Hannah stepped inside carefully, trying not to draw attention. She told herself Lucas might not even be there yet. Or maybe he would be surrounded by people. Either way, she could simply observe the exhibit and leave unnoticed. Her eyes drifted across the first wall of photographs. A couple laughing on a subway platform. A lonely man smoking outside a diner. A child watching rain through a bus window. Lucas had always captured moments that felt real. Moments that looked ordinary, but carried quiet emotion beneath the surface. Hannah moved slowly through the gallery, and then she saw it. The Chicago photograph hung alone on a larger wall at the center of the exhibition. A small crowd had gathered around it. People studied the image with fascination. "She looks so alive," one woman murmured. "It's like the photographer caught the exact second someone fell in love," a man said. Hannah stood at the edge of the crowd, barely breathing. The photograph looked larger than she remembered, more vivid. The lighting of the bar wrapped around her face gently. Her smile seemed soft and genuine. For a moment she almost didn't recognize the woman in the picture. She looked younger, freer, less careful. Someone beside Hannah spoke again. "I wonder who she is." "No idea," another replied. "Probably just a stranger." "Yes, just a stranger." That was the safest version of the truth. "Hannah," the voice came from behind her, low, calm, familiar. Every muscle in her body froze. Slowly, she turned. Lucas Grant stood a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. 7 years had changed him slightly. His hair a little shorter, his expression more thoughtful, but his eyes were exactly the same, steady, observant, as if he had been watching her long before she noticed him. "You came," he said quietly. Hannah struggled to find her voice. "I didn't realize you'd recognize me." Lucas gave a small smile. "I knew the moment you walked in." Her stomach tightened. "How?" "You walked the same way." She let out a nervous laugh. "That's impossible. Not for a photographer." They stepped away from the crowd and toward the quieter corner of the gallery. Hannah could still feel the photograph behind her, like a spotlight. Lucas studied her carefully. "You look good," he said. "So do you." There was an awkward pause. 7 years of silence sitting between them. Finally Hannah spoke. "I didn't know you took that picture." Lucas tilted his head slightly. "You didn't see the camera?" "No, you were laughing." "That doesn't answer the question." Lucas exhaled slowly. "I take pictures when moments feel honest." "And that moment felt honest to you?" "Yes." Hannah looked back toward the photograph. "It became famous. I didn't expect that." "But you kept it." Lucas nodded. "Some images stay with you." His eyes met hers again. That one did. The weight of his words settled heavily between them. Hannah crossed her arms slightly. "You never tried to find me?" Lucas looked surprised by the question. "I didn't think I was supposed to." "Why not? You left without giving me your number." "That didn't mean—" She stopped herself. Lucas watched her carefully. "It meant something," he said gently. Hannah looked down at the floor. "I had a life. I assumed that. A husband, kids." Lucas nodded again. "I figured." "You knew?" "I'm not blind." The calmness in his voice made her chest tighten. "And you still kept the photo?" Lucas considered that. "Yes. Why?" "Because it reminded me of something." "What?" He paused before answering. "That sometimes people show their truest selves for just a moment." Hannah felt suddenly exposed. "You didn't know me." "No," Lucas admitted. "But for a few hours that night, I saw someone who felt very real." The noise of the gallery faded slightly as people moved to another room for the artist talk. Lucas glanced toward the doorway. "I have to speak in a few minutes." "Of course." Neither of them moved. Finally, Hannah said quietly, "I almost didn't come tonight." "Why did you?" She looked at the photograph again. "Because seeing that online felt like seeing a ghost." Lucas studied her expression. Was it a bad memory? Hannah hesitated. No. The truth surprised even her. It was complicated. Lucas nodded slowly. Most honest moments are. A staff member approached from across the room. Lucas, they're ready for you. He nodded. Coming. Then he turned back to Hannah. I'm glad you came. She wasn't sure what to say. After a moment she replied softly. Me too. Lucas started toward the main gallery hall, then paused. One more thing. Hannah looked up. That night in Chicago, he said, I never thought of it as a mistake. Her breath caught. Lucas's expression remained calm. But I also knew it wasn't my life to follow. With that, he walked away toward the crowd waiting for him. Hannah remained where she stood. The room suddenly felt warmer, more crowded. She turned back toward the photograph one last time. The woman in the image still smiled softly, unaware of the future waiting beyond that moment. 7 years ago, Hannah had believed the past would stay buried. But standing in that gallery, watching Lucas speak to the audience, she realized something unsettling. Some moments never truly disappear. They wait, quietly, until life brings them back into the light. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't the mistake itself. It's realizing that the feelings connected to it may never have fully disappeared. The rain had started again by the time Hannah left the gallery. Seattle rain was different from Chicago storms. It didn't crash down violently or demand attention. It simply lingered, soft, persistent, impossible to ignore. Much like the thoughts circling in Hannah's mind. She sat in her car for several minutes before starting the engine. Lucas's voice echoed quietly in her memory. I never thought of it as a mistake. The words unsettled her more than she expected. Not because they tempted her, but because they reminded her how different two people could interpret the same moment. For Lucas, it had been a meaningful encounter. For Hannah, it had become a secret she carried like a weight. When she arrived home, the house was warm and bright. Lily sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a blanket draped over her legs. You're late, she said casually. Gallery event ran long. Dad's in the kitchen. Hannah hung her coat slowly. Her heartbeat still hadn't settled. She stepped into the kitchen. David stood at the counter, cutting vegetables for a late dinner, sleeves rolled up, reading glasses balanced low on his nose. He looked up when she entered. Hey. Hey. He studied her for a moment. How was the event? Good, she said automatically. Interesting photography. David nodded and returned to slicing carrots. But Hannah noticed the small pause before he resumed. You look tired, he added. Just a long night. She poured herself a glass of water. Her hands felt slightly cold. Big crowd? He asked. Yes. Anyone you know? Some people from the design community. David placed the knife down carefully. Did you meet the photographer? The question caught her off guard. She hesitated a fraction too long. Briefly, she said. David's eyes lifted slowly. Lucas Grant, right? Yes, I've heard of him. Hannah forced a small smile. He's getting a lot of attention right now. David nodded again, but something about the quietness of the moment felt different. Subtle, uneasy. Later that night, Hannah lay awake beside him. The bedroom was dark, except for faint street lights slipping through the curtains. David shifted slightly. You're restless tonight, he murmured. Am I? Yeah. She stared at the ceiling, just thinking about work. David didn't reply immediately. After a moment he said quietly, You've seemed distracted lately. Hannah's chest tightened. It's nothing. Doesn't look like nothing. She turned slightly toward him. David, it's just stress. He studied her face carefully in the dim light. Then he nodded once. Okay. But Hannah could tell he wasn't fully convinced. Over the next week, the uneasiness grew. Not dramatically. Just small things. Hannah found herself distracted during conversations. She checked her phone more often than usual. And occasionally, she searched for news about the exhibition. Something she told herself she shouldn't do, yet couldn't quite stop. David noticed. He didn't say much, but he noticed. One evening, he sat in his office reviewing legal documents while Hannah worked at the dining table on design sketches. The television in the background played softly. Suddenly, Lily called from the living room. Mom! Dad! Look at this! Hannah looked up. What is it? It's that photo exhibit you went to. Hannah froze. Lily held up her phone excitedly. This picture is everywhere on Instagram. David walked into the room. What picture? Lily turned the screen toward them. And there it was again. The photograph. The woman at the bar, laughing softly, unaware of the camera. Hannah felt her stomach drop. Pretty cool, right? Lily said. People are saying it's the best one in the whole show. David studied the image quietly. Then he glanced toward Hannah. Is that the one you mentioned? Yes, she said quickly. It's very popular. He looked at the photograph again, longer this time. Something about his expression shifted slightly. Thoughtful, curious, almost puzzled. Strange, he said slowly. What? Lily asked. David tilted his head. Something about her looks familiar. Hannah's heart skipped. She's probably just a random person, Hannah said lightly. Maybe. David handed the phone back to Lily, but the way his eyes lingered on Hannah made her pulse quicken. 2 days later, David was working late in his home office when he noticed something on the dining table. Hannah had left her laptop open while stepping upstairs. Normally, he wouldn't pay attention, but a notification popped up on the screen. Lucas Grant exhibition interview, full video. David frowned slightly. Curious, he clicked the link. The video opened. Lucas sat in a gallery chair, speaking to a journalist. The interviewer gestured toward the famous photograph displayed behind him. People are fascinated by this image, she said. Do you know who the woman is? Lucas smiled faintly. No. You never spoke to her? For a few hours. David leaned slightly closer to the screen. The interviewer laughed. That sounds mysterious. Lucas shrugged. Some moments are meant to stay unfinished. David watched silently. Then the interviewer asked another question. Was that night important to you? Lucas paused. Yes. The answer was simple. But something in the way he said it made David's chest tighten slightly. A floorboard creaked upstairs. David quickly closed the video. When Hannah returned a few minutes later, he looked up casually. Hey. Hey. She noticed the laptop closed in front of him. Working late again? Just finishing something. David watched her carefully. You've been reading a lot about that exhibition. Hannah hesitated. Professional curiosity? Of course. Another pause filled the room. Then David asked quietly, Did you know him before the gallery? The question landed heavily in the silence. Hannah forced herself to remain calm. No. David studied her face, searching, measuring. Something invisible seemed to shift between them, a crack forming in something that had once felt solid. Finally he nodded slowly. Okay. But as Hannah returned to her sketches, she felt the terrifying certainty that the stability of their life, the careful, quiet balance they had maintained for years, had just begun to fracture. And once suspicion enters the marriage, it rarely disappears quietly. The tension inside the Whitmore house did not explode all at once. It crept in quietly, like the Seattle rain that never seemed to stop. At first it was just silence, small pauses in conversations, longer looks between Hannah and David, questions that were asked casually but lingered afterward like unfinished thoughts. Hannah felt it every time David studied her face, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't realized existed before. 3 nights later, the moment finally came. The children had gone to bed. The house was dim except for a single lamp glowing in the living room. Hannah sat on the couch pretending to read a design magazine, though she hadn't turned the page in 20 minutes. David walked in slowly from his office. He carried his laptop. Without a word, he placed it on the coffee table and sat across from her. Hannah, he said quietly. The tone in his voice made her stomach tighten. Yes? He opened the laptop. The screen lit up the room. And there it was again. The photograph. The one from Chicago. David looked at her carefully. Who is she? Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. I told you, she said softly. She's just someone the photographer... Don't. His voice wasn't loud, but it stopped her immediately. David turned the laptop slightly toward her. I've been staring at this image for 3 days. Hannah's hands trembled. And? She asked quietly. And I know you. Her chest tightened painfully. I know the way you tilt your head when you laugh, David continued. I know the way you hold a glass when you're nervous. He leaned back slowly. That's you. The words landed like stones. For a long moment Hannah said nothing, because denying it now would only make things worse. David's voice softened. Please tell me I'm wrong. The silence stretched, and in that silence Hannah realized something inevitable. The secret she had carried for 7 years had finally reached its end. Yes, she whispered. David blinked. What? It's me. The room felt suddenly smaller. David stared at her as if the ground beneath him had shifted. How? Hannah swallowed. It was taken at a conference in Chicago. David's eyes hardened slightly. 7 years ago.
Yes. Another silence filled the space between them. Then David asked a question Hannah had feared for years. Did something happen with him? Her heart pounded violently. This was the moment. The point where truth would destroy everything she had spent years protecting. She could still lie, say it was just a conversation, say nothing happened, but something inside her refused. 7 years of silence had already been too much. Yes, she said. David's face went completely still. What do you mean, yes? Hannah forced herself to continue. We talked at the bar, and later, we went upstairs. The words felt heavy in her mouth. David's breathing changed, slow, controlled. Upstairs where? The hotel.
Another pause. Then he asked the question in the quietest voice she had ever heard from him. You slept with him? Hannah closed her eyes. Yes. The silence that followed felt unbearable. David stood up slowly. For a moment he just walked across the room and back again, like a man trying to understand something impossible. Finally he stopped. 7 years, he said. His voice cracked slightly. 7 years you knew this and never told me. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I was ashamed. So you hid it? Yes. David laughed softly. But it wasn't humor, it was disbelief. Do you have any idea what this feels like? Hannah whispered. Yes. No, he said sharply. You don't. He ran his hands through his hair. Every day for 7 years I trusted you. His voice broke slightly. I defended you. I believed in you. I built a life with you. Hannah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I know. And all that time you were carrying this? Yes. David stared at the photograph again, then at her. Was it just once? Yes. You never saw him again? Not until the gallery. And you didn't think that was something you should mention? I didn't know he would be there. That's not the point. The sudden anger in his voice filled the room. You should have told me the moment it happened. I know, she cried. Then why didn't you? Hannah struggled to answer. Because the truth was painful. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid of what? Losing everything. David looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that cut deeper than anger. You already did. They sat in silence after that, the photograph still glowing on the laptop screen between them. Finally, David spoke again. Did you love him? No. Did it mean anything? Hannah hesitated. And that hesitation hurt him more than any answer. I don't know, she said honestly. David turned away. That's even worse. Footsteps sounded upstairs, one of the kids moving in their room. The reminder of their family made the moment even heavier. David lowered his voice. They're sleeping. Yes, they have no idea their parents' marriage just exploded. Hannah wiped her tears. I never wanted to hurt you. Well, congratulations, David said quietly. You did. After a long silence, he closed the laptop. I need time. Hannah nodded weakly. Okay, I can't look at you the same way right now. The words felt like a knife, but she understood. I'm sorry, she whispered. David didn't reply. He simply walked toward the stairs. Halfway up, he stopped. Without turning around, he said, You didn't just betray me that night in Chicago. Hannah waited. His voice was quiet. You betrayed me every day you chose not to tell me. Then he disappeared upstairs, leaving Hannah alone in the dim living room. The secret she had carried for 7 years was finally gone, but in its place remained something far heavier, the truth, and the terrible realization that honesty, when it arrives too late, can break a life just as easily as a lie. The house felt different the next morning. Not visibly different. The same kitchen counters, the same coffee machine humming softly, the same pale Seattle light filtering through the windows. But something fundamental had shifted. Hannah could feel it in the silence. David had already left for work before she woke up. His side of the bed was cold. Downstairs, Lily sat at the kitchen table, eating cereal while scrolling through her phone. Owen packed his robotics kit into his backpack. Morning, Mom, Lily said. Morning. Hannah poured coffee, forcing her hands to remain steady. Where's Dad? Owen asked. He left early. That was technically true. No one asked anything else. Children were surprisingly good at sensing when adults were carrying something heavy they couldn't yet understand. The following weeks unfolded slowly. David moved into the guest room. Not permanently, at least he didn't say it was permanent, but the distance between them became physical as well as emotional. They spoke politely, logistically, about schedules, groceries, school events, but the intimacy that had once existed between them seemed to hover somewhere out of reach. One evening, Hannah found him standing alone in the backyard. The autumn air had turned colder. She stepped outside carefully. "David?" He didn't turn immediately. After a moment he said, "I keep replaying it in my head." Hannah's chest tightened. "The night in Chicago?" "Yes." He finally looked at her. "Not the part that happened there." "What part?" "The part where you came home afterward." His eyes had something deeper than anger. "You kissed me goodnight that week." Hannah felt tears rise again. "You sat at the breakfast table with the kids." "I know. You told me about the conference." Her voice shook. "I hated myself for it." David nodded slowly. "But you still did it." "Yes." The honesty hurt more than excuses would have. Meanwhile, life outside their home continued moving forward. Hannah still ran her design studio. Clients still called. Deadlines still existed. But the work felt different now. More fragile, more honest. She found herself redesigning a restaurant one afternoon and suddenly realized something. For years, she had been building beautiful environments that made people feel comfortable, safe, connected. Yet she had failed to protect those same things in her own marriage. The realization stayed with her long after the meeting ended. The exhibition eventually closed in Seattle. Lucas Grant gave several interviews before leaving for the next city on the tour. Hannah saw one of them late at night while scrolling through news articles. The interviewer asked the same question many others had asked. "Which photograph means the most to you?" Lucas smiled thoughtfully. "Probably the one taken in Chicago." "Why?" He paused. "Because it reminds me that every moment people share has a story behind it that the camera can't fully capture." The interviewer leaned forward. "What kind of story?" Lucas shrugged slightly. "Sometimes it's the beginning of something. And sometimes it's the end." Hannah closed the video. Something about the way he answered felt respectful, almost like a quiet goodbye. 2 days later, she received a short email. No subject line, just a message. "Hannah, I hope you are doing okay. I didn't know that photograph would bring complications into your life. Whatever happened between us that night, I never meant to cause harm. Take care of yourself. Lucas." Hannah read the message twice. Then she closed the laptop. Some people entered your life only briefly. Lucas had been one of those people. A moment, a chapter, not the whole story. Winter arrived in Seattle. Rain gave way to cold gray skies and early darkness. Inside the Whitmore house, things remained uncertain. David still slept in the guest room. Some days they talked more, other days barely at all. But one evening in December, David asked her to sit down. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where they had shared thousands of ordinary conversations over the years. David looked tired, but calmer. "I've been thinking a lot," he said. "About what?" "About whether people are defined by their worst mistake." Hannah didn't answer. "I'm still angry," he continued. "That part hasn't gone away." "I understand." And the silence afterward, that hurt more than the mistake itself. "I know." David stared at his hands for a long moment. "But I also know something else." "What?" 12 years of marriage isn't erased by one night. Hope flickered cautiously in Hannah's chest. "But it isn't automatically repaired either," he added. Her hope settled into something quieter. "I'm willing to try," David said slowly. "Try what?" "Figure out if we can build trust again." Tears filled her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He met her gaze. "This will take time. Maybe a lot of time. I'll do whatever it takes. I know." That night, Hannah lay awake again in the dark bedroom. But this time, the silence felt different. Not peaceful, not resolved, just open. The future was uncertain. Trust, once broken, did not rebuild overnight. But for the first time since the truth came out, there was at least a path forward, even if they didn't yet know where it led. Somewhere across the country, Lucas Grant prepared his photographs for the next gallery. Among them was the image from Chicago. The woman at the bar laughing softly. A moment frozen in time. To the world, it remained a beautiful anonymous photograph. But Lucas understood something others did not. Every photograph captured only a fragment of reality. The rest of the story continued long after the camera stopped clicking. Months later, one quiet evening, Hannah and David sat together on the back porch, watching the rain fall across their yard. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, David asked quietly, Do you ever think about that night? Hannah answered honestly. Yes, so do I. Another silence passed. Then David said something that lingered between them. Maybe the real question isn't whether it happened. Hannah looked at him. Then what is the question? He watched the rain for a moment before answering. Whether what we have now is strong enough to survive it. Hannah didn't reply, because the truth was, neither of them knew yet. And sometimes the most honest ending isn't certainty, but the fragile hope that love might still exist after the truth has finally been spoken.